Awesome. Hi, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you. We have a pretty jam-packed agenda today, so I'm just going to get us started with some introductions as others join in. Welcome to our session. This session is going to focus on recognizing parents as literacy champions in early and primary years. We're going to move beyond the deficit narrative around what parents don't have and can't do to what they really have and can do and can really become active participants in literacy development of their children. We're supported by the MC2H Foundation for this session, and we're excited to dive into this very important conversation today with all of you. Before that, I just wanted to quickly introduce GSF. For those of you who are new, the Global Schools Forum is a collaborative community innovation accelerator and a partnership builder for non-state organizations working to improve education at scale for underserved children in low and middle income countries. Our network consists of 165 organizations that are currently working across 63 countries, directly running or supporting 1.3 million schools and impacting close to 126 million children. A little bit about the objectives for the session today. We have threefold objectives today for the session. One is that we're going to look at deficit-oriented narratives in parental engagement, specifically when we talk about parental engagement for literacy development of children in early and primary years. We're going to look at both the deficit narratives that parents may have about themselves and how different stakeholders have deficit narratives about them and how it influences the way parents perceive themselves. We'll discuss about why it's important to move away from this narrative and have a more strengths-based approach in our parenting work. Second, we're going to look at examples of models, and we're going to look at evidence to really help us visualize what does this active engagement and strength-based lenses look like in parenting programs. And lastly, we're going to deep dive into the topic of parental confidence in specific, and we're going to talk about strategies that may work in improving that and also discuss other barriers that arise stemming from these deficit-oriented narratives that will come up in the session. So lots of exciting things to talk about. We're very excited to start off this work with the MC2H Foundation on the Power of Parents. This is our launch webinar, but this will be followed by a community of practice where we're going to connect research to practice and create a space for practitioners to come together and look at models that are really leveraging the power of parents. It will be a great opportunity for practitioners to connect with each other, to co-create solutions, to work through tools that will really enhance their programming in this area. So we're very, very, very excited to start this work off. And without further ado, sorry, just quickly on some housekeeping points before I pass it on to Kavita, who's going to moderate the remaining session. A couple of points on housekeeping. One, the webinar is being recorded. We're going to send you the link to the session afterwards in case you want to revisit parts of the discussion. We have a dedicated slot for Q&A towards the end, but if you have questions, we request you to continue to submit them either via the chat feature or the Q&A feature on Zoom, requesting the panelists to answer when they can in real time, but if there are certain unanswered questions, we'll pick them up in the Q&A section. We also have a poll that we're going to launch closer to the end of the session. We request you to take that. It'll really help us reflect on what worked and how can we make these sessions better in the future. Awesome. So I'm going to pass it on to Kavita, who's going to introduce our lovely panelists and take us through the rest of the discussion. Over to you, Kavita.
Thanks, Priyanka. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today. I'm delighted to facilitate this webinar with a really incredible panel. So let me introduce them to you quickly. We have three researchers joining us from the Open University who are involved in the research on the power of parents. We have Dr. Eric Ade-Chereme, who's a professor of education leadership and development with a focus on education leadership, equity, and social justice. We have Dr. Jane Doka, who's an education researcher specializing in inclusive education, gender equity, and youth transitions in the Global South. We have Dr. Margaret Ebubedike, who's a researcher in international education and development at the Open University. Thank you for joining us. We're also joined by Eleanor Sykes, who's the Interim Advocacy and Communications Lead from Lively Minds and an experienced early years teacher. And from ZZR Freak Foundation, we are joined by Volan Ochieng, Program Manager Innovations, who leads program implementation and contributes to strategic leadership at the organization. And our last panelist today is Siddhant Sachdeva, co-founder of Rocket Learning, an NGO working in the early childhood development space, impacting nearly 3.2 million children across India. Thank you all very much for joining us. And we're looking forward to hearing from each of you about the work that you're doing. We're going to start with a quick whip around with our panel. And we're going to ask them a question that we'd love for all of you to answer through the chat as well. If you reflected on your childhood, did you see your parents as teachers? So we're going to ask each of you to share a sentence or two on this question. Maybe I'll start with you, Jane, and then we can go around the room.
Yeah, I saw my parents as teachers, not necessarily teachers of literacy, but teachers about life. And that's where most of my foundational learning came from. Yeah.
Thanks, Jane. Eleanor?
Yeah, it helped that my mother was a teacher, but I've got a very specific memory of a child of her helping me read by blocking out parts of the words. And my dad has always asked quiz questions at lunch. So, yeah.
Thank you. Volan?
Like Helena, me too. My mother was a teacher, and so I saw her more of a teacher than a parent. So that was something that was very strong. He thinks that she could carry lessons from school and bring them in the home. So I was seeing more of a teacher than a parent. Thank you.
I love that we've got so many teachers and parents in this group. Siddhant?
Yeah, similar to Elena and Vala, my mother actually started in affordable private school after I turned 6. I was a pilot case or a test case for her. So I definitely saw her as a teacher after that. Yeah.
I can see now why all of you work in education. Margaret?
Yeah, thank you. I saw my parents first as parents, and then as teachers and as life coaches and mentors as well. Thank you.
Lovely. And Eric?
Yes, yeah, for me, not just my parents. Yeah, I saw my parents, my uncles, my aunties, they all played a significant role, not just in my early years, but all through my kind of formative years. And yes, I was always encouraged and supported at home with reading, writing, basic arithmetic. And that was sort of a norm, really, within the household.
Yeah, that's really fantastic to hear. And I think all of us have very formative memories of our parents either reading to us or doing stuff with us. Some of you mentioned them as life coaches. But often when we're speaking about parents, especially as we think about education, there's a deficit narrative that we hear when we speak about the role of parents. So what we would love to hear from each of you next is what are some of the deficit narratives that you have come across through the work that you're doing in the countries in which you're operating. So maybe we'll start in Kenya with Volan, and then we'll go across the continent and across continents.
Thank you very much, Avita. I think from the practice of the work that you are doing on around parents, seeking to, first of all, empower them and engage them in, have them engage in the children's education. What we have is the view that parents are either unwilling, lack the capacity, or don't have interest in supporting their children's education, which actually is not the true case on the ground, because I feel like these narratives tend to blame parents for kind of being viewed as disengaged without actually acknowledging the contextual and systemic barriers that hinder these parents from actually engaging. So it's something that blinds the view from why are parents not engaging vis-a-vis what do they need to help them engage actively in the children's education. So this is something that I feel clouds judgment when you look at parents and what parents' contributions are to their children's education, from my view.
Thank you, Volan. And I think you're trying to address some of that through your work. So we will talk about that as we come back around. Maybe I can ask Jane and Eric as well to talk about what they have seen in their work.
Well, picking up from what Volan has just said, there is this narrative that parents lack the knowledge and the skills to actually support their children's literacy, but that is also linked to another deficit narrative, which is deficit towards the home literacy practices, seeing the home literacy practices as inferior. And in other words, looking at parental involvement as being as having to look a certain way. So, for example, reading books, bedtime stories, etc. Whereas on the other side, parents can share lived experiences. There's storytelling, there's encouraging problem solving through discussion. And so it's a deficit narrative against the parents' ability, knowledge, and skills, and also that parents are disengaged and uninterested. But there's also a deficit narrative against the practices, around the practices that they actually engage, which bring about children's literacy, and the belief that only school-based literacy matters, and literacy practices that are happening at home don't bring as much value compared to what happens at school. So these are some of the narratives that we're coming across in our work.
And just to add to what Jane just said, there are also issues around cultural and linguistic knowledge, which is often undervalued. So when parents promote literacy in home languages, these are sometimes seen as obstructing formal education, especially where schooling is in a colonial or global language. And that is something that we're finding in our work. And again, through advocacy and some of the work that we're trying to do, we're trying to sort of kind of reverse those narratives. Very, very important. I mean, because this deficit view ignores the cognitive and kind of emotional benefits of multilingualism, which is really, really important. And there's a body of work that sort of talks about how multilingual children actually can develop that kind of level of literacy acquisition. So those are some of the things that we're coming across in our work. And again, as I said, through our advocacy work, we're trying to reverse those narratives.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Eric. I think you brought up multiple things that we're seeing where learning is happening, the language in which learning is happening, and parents' own ability and skills. So thank you for bringing that up. Siddhant, are you seeing similar things in India, or are you seeing different kinds of narratives in your work here?
No, for sure. I think if you look at it from a government's lens or from a community's lens as well, I think it's first important to acknowledge that parents actually spend 20 hours out of 24 hours, regardless of where you are in the world, right? So I think so to the government, to large systems, we do see this narrative that parents can't do it, won't do it, or won't do it. And they sort of overpowers, actively engage, building child relation, and actually providing tools, which to parents on how to engage. And that's what we work with. But it takes a lot of time to build about this within the community itself and within, let's say, the large system for actually that minds change, that parents probably won't do it. But from that to saying that, parents can do it right if provided.
We seem to have lost Siddhant, but from what I heard, he was making the point about how much time parents actually spend with their children. So we'll try and pick that up with him once he's back. But maybe Eleanor, you can add to this question as well to see what you're seeing in your work.
I think we're saying what everybody has said, to be honest with you. But I think where I would add a sort of extra layer to think about is that I don't know, we feel that sometimes there isn't actually the understanding right from the top about what parental engagement looks like. And so you've got this assumption, yes, parents can help, but they don't really understand that you don't have to be literate. So you don't have to know how to read or write. You just have to know how to ask a question. And really, parents should be seen as teachers, as educators, as well as carers and nurturers and so on. From the minute that baby pops out, the whole back and forth interactions, they start from the minute that parent first looks at that child. But that isn't necessarily seen as integral to early years educating, if you like. So I would just add, on top of what everybody else has said, it's that real understanding from your policymakers as to what actually that early years literacy means and how it can be done by anybody, irrespective of their own education, literacy levels, and so on.
Thanks, Eleanor. Siddhant, we lost you somewhere there. You were talking about the amount of time parents spend with their children. So if you want to maybe finish your thought.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just saying that when it comes to communities and large systems like the government, there has to be this belief that needs to be built against this narrative that, parents can't do it, won't do it, or won't do it right. Because these are the sort of fall throughs in terms of their beliefs which are happening. And I think to convert that to a constructive scenario where we, as a community and as large government systems, start believing in the power of parents is a journey. But I think each of these stages, right, there's a deficit narrative saying that, parents won't spend the time or can't spend the time, or even if they have the time, they won't do it right. And each of these beliefs is what we need to convert to a constructive narrative.
No, thank you all for bringing out, I think, the various points within the system where this deficit narrative is in play. And I think we're going to hear from each of you as well, how you are addressing this and how you are working with parents as partners in the education work that you're doing. So we are going to get a little bit more into the depth of your programming. For anyone who's listening, if you have questions for the for the panelists as they're speaking, please do use the chat or the Q&A feature so that we can answer them as we can. We have some time at the end for questions from you. But let me maybe start with Margaret. Margaret, you and Jane and Eric undertook at the Open University this research on the power of parents. So if you can maybe talk about what you found from the research in terms of the role that parents play in supporting specifically children's literacy development.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a very short story that describes what we saw in the field. So imagine it's 7 p.m. in a small rural home in Garam. Garam is a small semi-rural community sitting on the borders of Abuja in Niger State and in Nigeria. In this community, traditional livelihoods intersect with the expanding influence of the nearby capital city of Abuja. Many residents here engage in farming, petty trading, and local crafts. And they trade in staple foods like millet and yam. And the mother returns home from her farm one evening, and this mother has never had a chance to finish school. She sits with her children by the fireplace, and she's not reading a story from a book, but she's telling one. A story that has been passed down through generations to her. The child listens attentively and asks questions, learns new words, and makes sense of her world through this interaction. Our POP research revealed that this in itself is literacy in action. Yet parents, especially in marginalized communities such as Garam, are often seen as lacking the skills to support their children's literacy and language development. This POP research offers us the space to rethink the deficit narrative or risk falling into what Chimamanda Adichie refers to as the danger of a single story. Scholars like de Souza Santos refers to this as epistemic erasure, creating stereotypes that often downplays the value and the wealth of knowledge that parents bring. The project examined how parents and caregivers strengthen children's literacy development, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And what we found was that, 1, parents, including extended family members, regardless of their educational background, play a significant role in supporting children's literacy development by bridging the formal education and practical learning within the home and community. Secondly, we found that parents and caregivers, including extended family members, utilize localized practices such as games, storytelling, songs, and participation in cultural events and activities to support learning and literacy development for their children. Thirdly, we also found out that the diverse languages spoken at home and in the community environment enhance children's literacy development. It broadens their vocabulary and improves their adaptability to various linguistic and social contexts within the home, with the home language serving as a bridge to better grasp classroom learning. Fourthly, we also found that parents lack this confidence on how their cultural practices and lived experiences can enhance literacy. We also identified that when you target workshops where parents can understand how their own lived experiences and their cultural practices can be used to support children's literacy learning, there's this now I know moment for the parents. I'm going to stop there so I don't run over my time. Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. We can come back to this, but maybe if you could you shared some interesting stories about what you saw in Nigeria, and you talked about, I think, localized practices as being really critical. So we'll come back to maybe some of the data that was coming out of the research. But I'll move to you, Eleanor. I think as Margaret was saying, many parents, especially those with limited formal education, are less confident in their own ability to support children's literacy growth. At Lively Minds, you're helping parents overcome this challenge. So can you talk about how you're working with parents as equal partners in literacy development?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kavita. I think, first of all, we very much agree with Sudan's point about the amount of time children spend with their parents. You know, they're spending 75% pre-primary children of their time with their parents. So to miss working with them is just missing one of the greatest opportunities we have. And we view them as the sleeping giants. They are the ones who actually have the power to really get that learning starting early. So we run a parenting program which focuses on rural last mile communities, and it addresses two key things, really. One is that parents can and should be recognised as part of their child's holistic learning and nurturing, and two, that they already have those skills and knowledge to do so, as we've all attested already. And we also focus heavily throughout our programme, which I'll explain in a moment, on confidence, belief in yourself and your skills, working together, collaborating, giving them opportunities to practice, knowing that learning from failure is acceptable and actually desired, because that's how we improve. No one ever gets things right first time. These are all strong things throughout every aspect of our programme, because we've worked predominantly with mothers, and we find that many of our mothers are lacking in confidence, even in their basic parenting skills, let alone seeing themselves as educators. So that deficit narrative heavily comes from the mothers that we're working with. So that's something that we address through every aspect of our programme. So our programme is delivered through local partners. Mothers sign up for 2 years. That is all delivered verbally, so you absolutely don't have to be literate. And in fact, most of our parents aren't literate. Fathers are included for elements of it as well, because obviously we are a parenting programme. So although we want to deliver mostly through the medium of mothers, fathers are clearly an incredibly important part of that process too. So we run weekly, the mothers run weekly play schemes within whatever system there is. So in Ghana, that's through kindergarten classrooms. In Uganda, it's through community health centres, and it may well be delivered underneath a tree. But the mothers commit to a 2-year programme where they have training in how to deliver play-based learning, but also it's related to all areas of holistic early childhood development. And all the content is very much contextualised for our communities and our parents. We also have radio broadcasts reaching 2.4 million in Ghana and Uganda in 18 languages. So again, parenting support there. And the mothers run play schemes themselves. Once a week, they commit. There you go, lovely picture there of the mothers running the play schemes using games made from local resources and using all of the skills and strategies and techniques that they are trained on, such as how to ask questions, giving children space to answer. All of these things do not require the mothers to be literate. They are a very strong theme throughout everything we do, is that you do not have to be, you're not a teacher, you don't have to be literate, you just have to know how to do it, and that you have all the skills of how to do it. So for instance, they are trained in, as I say, how to ask questions, allowing time to speak, following the child's voice, taking turns, explaining what they're doing, talking about what they're doing, and so on. Our parent workshops, for example, they would cover topics such as how to show your thinking. So this might sound common sense to you, but when you're getting dressed, for example, you're talking through what you're doing, showing your thinking. Oh, where's my shoe? I've got one shoe here. Where's my other shoe? Here I have 1, 2 shoes. I'm going to put them both on my feet. On it goes. That is early literacy right there. And so a really key theme of what we're doing is that you don't have to find time, isolate time to teach your child. You can integrate teaching your child in their literacy in every single activity you do all the time, because you're already doing it. And what do we see as a result of our programme? We see that apart from the fact that the programme results in an extra year of learning gains for children, which is considerable when you're working with such young children, mothers say that they feel valued, they're called madam by their communities, they're seen as recipients of containers of knowledge. Their community says, what have you been learning? Tell us. They share with their community, they collaborate with their community. You see a whole uplift in their community through what the mothers are learning. Others respect them more, and they have more respect themselves too. And finally, we see a real increase in parents and confidence parents in their local language. Because the workshops are delivered in their local language, so they're translated by the trainers, so the kindergarten teachers in Ghana or the community health workers in Uganda, they are actually enriching their vocabulary themselves in their mother tongue, in the language of their community. So this has a direct impact on just the words that everybody's using, the way sentences are constructed, the conversations that people have. So that is a huge impact from the program. And finally, there is great power in having a cohort of women of a community engaged in the same learning program. They share their experiences with each other, they reflect, they share the things that they've learned. And learning is seen as something that can happen at any time and during any activity. So that was a rather rushed explanation of what we do, but how this idea that literacy is something that isn't isolated, but is threaded throughout everything that we do in our program at Lovely Minds. Thank you.
Thanks, Eleanor. And I think that was I know it was a quick whistle-stop tour of all of the work that you're doing at Lively Minds, but I think it gives us a sense of the various ways in which parents can engage. And both from Margaret and you, the word that is coming up over and over is just localized, every day. It's in the everyday, right? And I think that is coming up so often that it's something we need to be thinking about. I'm going to switch to you, Volan. And I think it's been mentioned a couple of times already. A common concern we have heard is that parents are often unable to contribute because they either lack time or resources. What is your take on this? And how does your parent engagement and empowerment work address some of these concerns?
Victor, I think when Margaret was presenting, I felt like she was the approach was consistent with what we adopted in Kenya, where in our case we wanted to understand what are the critical or silent barriers that hinder parents from actively engaging in their children's education. And we felt that the best way to do this is not actually going on literature, but actually going to these parents and talking to them and getting their perspective as to why they are or are not actively engaged in their children's education. Now, when we immersed ourselves with these parents, what came around from the interaction was that the feedback was oscillating around three key areas: the issue of space, the issue of capacity, that is the lack of space, lack of capacity, and even low motivation and confidence for parents. So these were the very silent barriers that were emerging from parents that as a parent, I'm in a rural community, I'm juggling between jobs which are largely informal to make ends meet, and then a school asked me to participate in my child's education by visiting the school, making rounds, confirming what my children are doing, when and at what time. They felt this was quite limiting and hindering in the sense that I have to provide the balance between providing basic needs like food and shelter versus just checking my child's education or homework or going to school to check all these were quite outweighed by this. So the time was largely accorded to providing basic needs as opposed to education which was considered a secondary need. The other issue that we found was the issue of lack of resources or skills, which we place as a lack of capacity, where some parents were feeling that they were unable to help their children with reading or writing because they themselves were lacking these skills. They could not teach their children how to read because they themselves are unable to. Even when they're called by the school to come and support their children, they were largely considering this as a form of humiliation because if I go to the school, I myself as a parent, I'm not able to read. So if I go to school, this is going to come out strongly and might even subject my child to even further embarrassment because the parent is not able to read. So that's one of them. Another thing was the issue of motivation or confidence on the part of parents, which we saw as very critical. And so these were examples that we had here were like some of the parents had previous negative past experiences with the schools, and some of them could have been dismissed by the teachers or the schools in question. And this kind of demotivated this caliber of parents to re-engage or participate in their children's education. So our view of this was then to identify who are our parents based on the finding that we get from the challenges that we're getting from this feedback, that we need to develop or define who the parents are, so that in this case, we are having a tailored intervention that speaks to the different category of parents that we had. So what we found was that in our immersion, in our engagement with the teachers, we find 7 categories of parents, and this calls for targeted intervention for this kind of parents, because each category required a specific tailored intervention that suits this category. So among them included those parents who had the capacity but lacked the space to engage, and vice versa. Another category of parents we've met is that parents who lack the capacity to engage, who has the intention to engage the school, but now lacks the capacity. We've also had cases, we've also seen a group of parents who have the opportunity, but they lack the necessary motivation for them to engage with the children, with the school. And another group is parents who who have the capacity to engage the school, but lack the space to engage the school. But we also have parents who have the capacity, but they have no motivation at all to engage the school. Now, the parent that we found most common that is we are targeting, we're specifically targeting, and this is the parent that is in a critical, what you can say, the high dependency unit in terms of parent, is the parent who has neither capacity, has no motivation, and has no space to engage. So this is the parent who literally has no motivation, doesn't have the space, doesn't have the capacity, and does not have the motivation to engage. And also now the final parent we identified here was now what you call the ideal parent, the parent who has the space, has the capacity and motivation. What you call the ideal parent has all what he needs to engage and also engaging. So this calls for a targeted intervention, that because for a parent who has the capacity and space and motivation to engage, the intervention that we require for this parent is different from an intervention that will be provided for a parent who has neither capacity, neither motivation, and neither space to engage. So our approach is largely to work around, you have the parents subgroups or subdivided into groups, then provide for them a tailored intervention that we feel suits specific parents to help them engage in their children's education, but not just engage, but sustained engagement over time in their children's education. And this involves having on board stakeholders, critical stakeholders like the school itself and the community. So our approach on doing this is we've developed a framework, a parental empowerment and engagement framework, where we are coordinating, we are organizing or framing our interventions around, where we focus on promoting largely collaboration between the school and the parents, so that there's that mutual kind of benefit and relationship between the parents and the schools to promote that sustained engagement between the parents and the school itself. Then we also focus on the aspect of communication, which calls for establishment and strengthening of a two-way communication system or channel, where it's coming from the parents and also the school. It's not just one way, unidirectional, where we have parents or receiving instruction from the schools on what they need to do and how they need to do it, but having a case where also parents inject what they feel ought to be done to them to ensure that they are kind of motivated to engage. A case in point, a good example that we had from the field is when a parent noted that if I walk into a school, for instance, and we are a group of parents, and parent Eleanor will be heard more over me, then when we need to participate, they rather have parent Eleanor making for us decisions, rather than calling me to hear what Eleanor is presenting to us. So having that kind of communication, a two-way communication where all parents are heard, and there's that respect on the part of the schools for all parents, regardless of how their education, regardless of their educational levels and how they project their knowledge in the school, they need to have that kind of two-way engagement. There's also what we find or what we're doing is having capacity sharing, and this is where we feel there are gaps on the part of the parents. We work on modalities on supporting these parents, including providing them with the resources or materials on how they could support their children education at home, to ensure that there's that mutual kind of communication between the teacher and the school, because the moment you're sharing resources, the parents are able to engage both directly and indirectly with these materials and ask questions that learners are able to cascade to the school to inform further collaboration and engagement and promote that sustained parental engagement in the children's education. Lastly, we're also working around leveraging the community resources. What does the community have to offer that parents can bank on, can rely on to ensure that they are engaged in the children's education? Do we have these community libraries? And if we have these community libraries, are they accessible? So those are the how we are working around promoting active and sustained parental engagement in the space that you're working in, largely embedding this within the programs that you work in, so that beyond the lifetime of the project, do we have a sustained uptake? So parents are able to have what you can say a community of practice that initially is set up, and they're building on that to promote their sustained engagement. So our approach to this is that when parents are engaged, we believe that they don't need to have what you call the the perfect literacy skills or time or lot of time for them to engage. But what they need is just support, here to be heard, and be visible on the teacher's eye, so that when I attend as a parent, visible on the side of the parents, that and my insights are input are adopted as any other parent. That itself serves a motivation that for parents to engage and promoting that sustained school level and community level engagement. I give it to you, Kavita.
Thank you so much, Volin. That was a really interesting way that you've thought about the problem, your categorization of parents themselves within the community, and then how you're creating interventions that are really going to build long-term sustainability of practice, which I think is really key. So thank you so much for sharing both the categorization as well as the framework that you use to kind of build that bridge between parents and more formal schooling systems as well. I'm gonna move to Siddhant now and ask about Rocket Learning's work, which is focused on improving both the quality and quantity of parent-child interactions in the early years. And you do this through a combination of technology, media, and behavior change incentives for parents. So can you talk about that? And can you talk about what you're learning through this process?
Thanks, Kavita, and thanks everyone for sharing. I think a lot of the points that have been covered resonate with our work. So at Rocket Learning, we started off working with parents, and our belief in parents has always been that even if a parent is able to spend 30 minutes of quality time with their children in play-based activities, that can really create a difference in the child's education as well as in the parent-child relationship. The way we go about it is, for those who are not aware, India has one of the largest community-run daycare center network in the world, where around 1.3 million daycare centers are operating in India today. We partner with the governments to actually reach the parents via these daycare center workers, which are called Anganwadi centers in India. So if I am an Anganwadi and I have around 15 or 20 parents whose children are coming to my Anganwadi, I will create a sort of WhatsApp group with them, and our Rocket Learning bot will automatically send daily nudges on these groups for the parents to actually look at and then do those activities at home and send them back. What we are essentially doing is trying to digitize an existing community and to influence parental behaviors via giving them what we call AIM, which is A stands for aspiration, that something needs to be done at this age. I is information. So as a parent, what do I do if I need to do something? Here is the information on how to engage with the children. And M stands for motivation and measurement, that if you are building the right behaviors, then we'll keep motivating you. So if I'm a parent on that WhatsApp group, I'm sent a simple activity at the start of the day, that this is a demo of an activity that I can do at home. I do that and send back, and then I get sort of a certificate which says I've become a smart parent or a smart mother or a super dad, things like that, right? Which keeps my motivation going. I think as we went along the work, we saw that around 50 to 60% of parents became responders, but we were very curious to find out what were the other 40% thinking. And I think one of the main themes that came out was confidence, where a lot of the mothers and fathers that we worked with were themselves not educated and struggled with this confidence of, believing that they can be educators. And I think it's a combined perception issue with the community, with the daycare center, with the government, and with the parents themselves, that this perception needs to change. One of the serendipitous things while using technology was that a lot of the parents, around 60% of the parents that we work with, believe that the technology is actually their daycare center worker who's sending them daily videos. That actually works really well because the information then comes from a position of influence. So we also understood from parents what can actually influence their mindsets. Is it something that is coming from the government as an official program that can really kickstart that behavior change? Most of us also are on a behavior change journey at a personal level, right? Today we join gym groups, fitness groups, and it's very difficult to break through the first barrier of inertia, which is there, right? And I think that's what we are aiming for, that in the first 3 months of the program, if the parent really sort of starts their journey, then we have seen fantastic impact. Today, we are working with around 3.2 million children, and we see that around 50 to 60% parents are responders, and around 25% of them are more regular responders. This is technology and behavior change working at scale. And now we are also on the path to personalize, as Volan was mentioning in terms of categories. We've now started identifying parents who are struggling with confidence, and they get focused campaigns which are targeted towards building confidence as a metric. And I think what the first thing that we saw from a measurement perspective is, are parents increasing the time that they spend with the children, which is the quantity part. Then I think we also measured the parental mindsets to actually see if we are changing parental mindsets. And finally, we measure the children's learning outcomes, which similar to what Eleanor was mentioning, that we see around 25% improvement in learning outcomes for children on literacy and other outcomes. And these activities pertain to pre-literacy or basic activities that they can do with language that they're already using at home. So it builds on existing infrastructure which is there at home, and the parents don't need anything additional to do it. But I think a large part of what we also need to look at is how to change large systems perspective on engaging parents as equal partners in the educational system. So we define it as something that we call a political economy loop. If parents really wake up, they will seek, they'll not just involve themselves in the education, but they'll actually seek and demand a high quality early childhood development system from the government. And then the ECD system will have to step up its supply via platforms and products that are similar to what we are building. So we hope that this sort of behavior change journey instigates a demand supply loop where demand also increases and supply has to increase to match that. So that's a little bit about what we do and how we perceive parents as equal champions in the journey of the.
Thanks, Siddhant. And there's a couple of questions that have come into the Q&A. So if I can just ask you to take them, and then I'll go to some other questions. And for everyone in the audience, if you have specific questions for our panel, please pop them either into the chat or the Q&A function, and we can take them now, because we are going to throw it open to all of you to ask your questions and engage with this conversation as well. So Siddhant, the question to you is, can you give us an example of the kind of a nudge that is sent via WhatsApp? And can you also talk about how some of these nudges are being personalized?
So a couple of examples of nudges are, one is a type of a demo activity. So if you're teaching the word, I'm taking an English word for simplicity, if you're teaching the word cat starts with the letter C or a sound actually, and then you ask the child to identify objects which start with the same sound in your household, right? And the nudge is basically a demo of a parent and a child doing it. And the ask from the parent is actually to repeat that activity. Another a story about a parent and about a mother and a father struggling with a concept and figuring out the journey from that struggle to be effective learning partners with the children, right? And I think story is meant to inspire. The first activity is meant to direct their time. So either we are directing their time towards a certain type of use, or we are inspiring them that, they can do it. That's an example of a nudge. In terms of, I think there are also other motivational nudges, which are recognition of behaviors. If you are doing behaviors for, let's say, continuous weeks or continuous days, then you get motivated by a smiley report cards or other such things which parents
We seem to lose Siddhant every time he's answering a question, but I think we got at least some amount of a response. We missed the personalization. Siddhant, do you want to finish that response on personalization?
Yeah, sorry. So on the personalization bit, I think it's more of a milestone-based personalization. So you're unlocking milestones as you're going along the journey with the child. And there are also some domain-specific personalization. So if as a parent, I'm struggling with confidence or I'm not engaged enough, I will get a nudge saying, specifically targeting me and directing me to resources that, Volan was also mentioning in terms of my own capacity building to overcome that barrier. So there are two types of personalization. One is personalizing my learning journey or being able to visualize my learning journey. And the second is basically helping me on the learning journey if I am not able to move ahead or struggling with it. And both these are strands in personalization that we look at.
Super, thanks. Thank you. Very, very helpful, I think, because you are talking about behavior change, but also giving them the prompts to be able to use at home. So I think that was really helpful. There's a question in the chat that I'm going to open for any of you to answer. Maybe I'll start actually with the research. The question is, as an organization or what you're seeing in the field, how do you engage parents? It's hard to find parents together as a congregation, unlike students in a classroom. So maybe I can ask Eleanor and Volan to talk about that. But also for the team from Open University, did you see any practices of organizations where they're congregating and working with parents? And I know, Eleanor, you spoke about fathers. So if one of you also wants to speak about how and where fathers are coming into this process, that would be really helpful.
Thanks. I'll start and then Eric and Jane can jump in. Yeah. So in the field, because our research was split across two phases. So we had the literature review where we looked at across literature resources to see what literature is saying and what extent of study has been done. And then we went into the field to engage the parents and caregivers themselves. So what we did in the field was to leverage on local communities. So for instance, in one of the communities, we had to work with the community leader. And we found out that having this sort of buy-in in each community supported our engagement with the parents. So we didn't just go in as researchers from the Open University to engage with the community. We had to we had initial engagement. And so we call it a community-based approach to research. Within a community-based approach to research, it tends to be more participatory, where you engage the communities as co-researchers and not those who are end users of your findings. So engaging them as co-researchers actually brings the buy-in and that commitment and ownership to that work. And that was what we saw in the field. So if you want to engage parents, especially in communities where parents engage in different kinds of activities that do not give them the space and time to be actually fully involved, then you need to work within their own spaces to understand their cultural dynamics and social ways of living and doing, and work according to that rather than against that. Because when you do that, then you find out that you have the buy-in, you have the parental support. I'll take, for example, we went into a community, I think it was a farming community, and we're told that you can't meet with us on a Tuesday because we had to go into the farm. And then we came in on a Wednesday and all the parents turned up. But we wouldn't have achieved that if we did not link or liaise with those key voices in the community that give us access to that community.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. Just to add to that, I think the same approach is what we adopt, and we've adopted in our practice, where we've always, as I presented my presentation, leveraging the resources that we have in the community. And this has been the charge, because we feel like for you to have ownership amongst them, you need to have religious leaders on board, growing them, because some of them were accessing them within their houses, and for you to access them, for them to let you in, you must have that trusted person on board. And that was our approach, was having a religious leader walking through with us. We've also had cases where we walk through the school, capitalize on the school's parent meetings or parent events, where we know parents will be available, and then engage parents in those kind of platforms. So when schools call these parents, we also request an opportunity to engage these parents, which we do effectively maximizing on such kind of opportunities. And lastly, we also work with the administration. We know how in the African context, we have the chiefs. And so these chiefs, when they call meetings, the parents know that there must be something at the chief's place and why we are being called. And so the turnout is usually massive. And so these are the kind of platforms that we use to reach our parents. And I can say that we've reported successes in reaching mass of parents with this kind of approach. Thank you.
So thank you. I think, Eric, you were going to come in.
I was just going to say that, I mean, one of the things that when you get into the community, you need to be aware of as well is that, I mean, there's growing body of knowledge, as you've heard today, around kind of the potential of parents. So people know that parents have the potential, but we have to move beyond that. It's about emphasizing the agency and influence that the parents would have. So here we're not talking about just potential, recognizing that they already hold power in shaping literacy. So we just have to move beyond that. Oh, they've got potential. We know they've got potential, but actually we want to move beyond that and tap into that power, that social and cultural capital that exists. We have to move as well from potential to practice. Here we're talking about, we're not interested in kind of thinking about what are they doing. That's not enough, because we know they are doing a lot of stuff within the community. So kind of shifting it from the kind of these theoretical narratives to real world engagement, because we know that exists. And then we've heard colleagues also talk about the collaboration and partnership. So we have to move from saying that parents have got the potential to do it. Actually, we have to reframe it and see them as equal collaborators in developing tools, approaches, strategies for their children's literacy journeys. We shouldn't see them as just supporters and helpers, but actually active collaborators and equal partners. We also have to move beyond seeing them their potential to support into leadership as well. We have to position them as leaders and recognizing that the home and family environment, that's some of the things that we found out, and recognize the potential that exists within the home and family environment and how that can facilitate the informal literacy development of their children. And finally, I think one of the things that we're encouraging is kind of seeing parents and caregivers as being present. And I think colleagues have mentioned that as well, and centering some of the work that they do as crucial within the home and family environment, but also moving that capital back into the school, because there's always that kind of debate in terms of to what extent can we tap into that capital within the school environment and how we harness that to support literacy development within the school environment.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think all of you are kind of reflecting very similar themes, which is there is power with parents. We have to stop talking about them in a way that is very reflective of that deficit narrative that we've been speaking about. So thank you for reiterating that. Eleanor, Siddhant, do you have any comment on the question that I asked about fathers? I know, Eleanor, you talked about mums in the community, but how are you working with fathers, and are you seeing an increase in the way fathers are coming into this process as well?
Thank you, Kavita. Yeah, so echoing what everybody said, when we work with the community, that whole recruitment process of people into the program is a huge amount of what we do. It takes a lot of work, as does motivation to join and to then keep attending. You know, it would be naive to say that motivation isn't something we have to properly consider to keep parents engaged and give them the time to then start to see the real benefits of what they do. So we utilize community leaders, faith leaders massively as well. And that works particularly, I think, when we're looking to engage fathers. You know, we know that that whole deficit narrative sometimes comes from traditional narratives as well, which are part of the challenge that we're trying to address, and supporting fathers to see themselves as part of that education journey as a child, of their child, and that it is their responsibility to do so. It isn't something that's just left to school or to the mother, but also that it's an enjoyable, fun thing to do, that participating in learning and care and all of these other things that we work on in our program is a pleasure, and it builds those closer, more meaningful relationships with your children. So parents obviously are targeted in the same way as mothers through our radio broadcasts, which reach, as I say, over 2 million listeners in Ghana and nearly 500,000 in Uganda. They are very much designed for parents as a whole. The mothers join up for the parenting programme and they receive 3 parenting workshops a term, but fathers are encouraged and welcome to join one of those workshops. And in fact, in the photograph that I shared, they're very present there. And so they are then practicing whatever that is in that workshop with the mothers. They're part of it. They are seen as being part of, I hesitate the word solution, but, you know, what do you need to do to support your children? Fathers have to be involved too. And all of the strategies that we teach mothers in their separate workshops are very much go home, share this with your husband, with the men in your community. So they are very much seen as part of what needs to be done to help children and start their learning and their literacy, particularly in this part of this conversation. But obviously our programme focuses on bringing the mothers in, but that is a way to then bring the fathers in as well. It's not that it's just one. We all know, and the research says that both parents are what you need.
Yeah, I think echo what Elna was saying. I think it has to be thought through from a branding and positioning perspective as well. When we are talking about, you know, a school or a government launching a program, we have actively shied away from calling any of the interventions focused only on mothers, because I think then that sort of also goes into building a sort of gendered narrative. But I think we have to be careful and we have to understand which of the gender stereotypes we are trying to attack head on or change or convert, right? So we do have campaigns once a quarter or once in 4 months targeted at fathers only, calling them super dads and showing real life stories of fathers who are earlier presuming that it is not on them to actually take on the responsibility to help with the child's education. And that father is seeing stories around him where people are figuring out how to balance work as well as spending time with the children. The other conundrum that we face from a technology access perspective is that almost 75 to 80% households in India today have access to one smartphone, but that smartphone is often owned by the father. And only around 30% or 35% have dual smartphone households. So you have to be careful in terms of defining access. So we make sure that both parents are on the group. The school teacher or the Anganwadi teacher, the daycare center worker is incentivizing or actively pushing for both parents to be on the group, and whoever is free can participate during the time of the day whenever they find time and access. So I think there's a bunch of, gender related stereotypes that are there. I think the first thing is to be aware of them, and the second thing is to be cognizant that we are not being, if not gender transformative, but at least we are being gender aware whenever we are talking about the narrative of father, mother, parent together. I think that's what we evaluate all of our collateral also against. So if there's a view in the background, it's only a mother and a child are doing an activity, it's good to have the father present in the background. Even if from an optical perspective, you shouldn't have a collateral, which is just showing a skewed picture. So that's some of the checks that we do from a digital content perspective as well.
Thanks, Dan. Super helpful.
Jump
I
in.
think we're
Okay.
2 minutes away. And
Yeah.
there's questions still rolling in. So I'm gonna ask if the panelists don't mind staying on for another couple of minutes. If I know some of you might have to drop off. So I'm gonna do this in a slightly awkward way. I'm gonna have Priyanka launch a poll so we can get feedback on the session while we still continue to answer questions. I did want to thank everyone that needs to drop off on the hour, because I know you have very busy schedules, and I did also want to thank our panelists, but I'm happy to take a couple more questions before we wrap, if that's okay with everyone. So Priyanka, if you want to please launch the poll so that folks can take that. Margaret, sorry, you were going to say something, and then I have a question that's come in for Eric as well.
Yes, I was just going to say that while we understand that fathers are very critical as well as mothers, but in some of these communities, it is what it is. The gender stereotypes exist that mothers are the ones who are pushed forward to support children. I mean, we saw that in Nigeria, where we didn't even see one father coming in as part of the group that were called to for the workshops we did. So we shouldn't discard that this happens in some of these communities because of this sort of stereotypical ways that mothers are viewed. So we should, when we design interventions, to understand how to leverage on what we have available to us and understand the potent power of those mothers. And I think Eric talked about the leadership roles and all that. How do we position mothers, considering that in some of these communities, the narrative is not going to change. It's going to be mothers who are constantly going to be supporting children. Let's not see it as a deficit way or we need to push the fathers there. I mean, for these fathers, they need to go to work, they need to pay bills, but mothers are there. So how do we? I think Lively Mind is doing something fantastic around that area, because in our review, when we did our review, so that Lively Mind was supporting mothers as champions to support children in the kindergarten class. So I think when we design our initiative, we should understand that this happens in communities. We cannot excuse it, especially in the global south. And then how do we leverage on the situation to ensure that children continue to be supported by their parents, whether mother or father? Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret.
And
Go ahead, Tara.
and let's not forget the uncles and aunties and brothers
Uncles
and
and
sisters,
aunties, and extended family.
Because who are not necessarily parents, who are contributing to literacy development, grandmothers, uncles, brothers, sisters, you name it.
Yeah.
Rebecca, can I just jump in very quickly while we still have 18 members in the audience here, just to say, because I know that when Priyanka gave her introduction at the beginning, she framed this as part of a wider series around what will be being discussed around the role of parents. And so I did just want to give everybody here an opportunity to say thank you for your feedback in the webinar chat. And many people have found this time very, very insightful, but let this be the beginning of a wider conversation where we deep dive into different practices. So before they drop off, I just wanted to share that this will be the beginning of a series of a work managed by Global Schools Forum and going forward.
Thanks, Tara. We were gonna send, and we will send all of you who are in this session a follow-up email with information on how you can join the community of practice. So please look forward to that from Priyanka. There's also a bunch of requests both in the chat and in the Q&A just asking for resources. I think Volan has been asked by a few people if you can share the framework. So Volan, if you can send that to us at GSF, we'll make sure that everyone gets it along with the recording and information on the community of practice as well. But if I can maybe take a couple of really quick questions, and I'm not going to go past 5 past. I think the question on whether you're seeing any differences between rural and urban settings might be interesting to answer, if any of you have insights on that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the...
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, we can speak from the extended literature review that we did. Because a lot of the work in this space has focused on kind of low resource context, a lot of the body of knowledge that we have at the moment focuses on rural and peri-urban areas. So it's not unusual to see a lot of the body of work situated in that space. As to whether there are differences, I think there's very limited evidence out there in terms of the pure research. So it's something that we may want to find out about their assumptions based on the literature in Europe, parts of North America, that yes, in urban settings, parents are likely to be more educated. Parents are likely to have access to more resources. So a lot of literacy and numeracy activities do happen within the home environment, unless perhaps within those urban areas, you're talking about those we would describe as lowly socioeconomic productivity. And then, of course, that whether they are in an urban area or in a rural area, those low socioeconomic status does impact on the level of activity that can happen within the home and family environment.
Let me jump in, Eric. I think on that response to a question that was asked in the chat, someone was asking about resources that could be used. And I think my response is simple. From my experience in the field, while some of these guidelines exist, they are far more powerful when you co-create or co-develop this with parents themselves. I mean, taking into consideration the context, the background, and this ensures that they reflect the local realities, the values and knowledge systems, making them more relevant and impactful. I'm just responding to the question around if there are tools or resources available out there. Yes, they are, but they are far more powerful if you can develop these tools with parents to take into consideration what Eric has just mentioned earlier. Thank you.
I think a bit, and I think adding to Eric's comment on the issue of parents both urban and rural. Anecdotal evidence suggests that parents in the urban areas are more involved than those in the rural, but I think this is also explained by the contextual environment in which these parents operate, where if you look at parents in urban settings, they are largely more exposed to income, and more private schools are available in private schools in urban areas, which are calling for more parental engagement compared to those in the rural areas. So you'll find more parental engagement for parents in the urban setting compared to those in the rural setting, though there's very limited evidence that suggests the same or otherwise.
Another thing that is in the urban setting is that most of the parents use paid teachers because of the time and availability. So we had some conversation with communities where they talked about paying lesson teachers to support their children. So I think it's all about when you compare rural and urban settings, that narrative that we've been talking about around parents in rural settings not having that capacity or the skill to support their children literacy learning. As compared to those in urban settings, some of them do have the skills, but what they do is that they have to outsource supporting their children because of the time and availability.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to have the skill, and it's another thing to have that time and commitment to support your children at home. So
Yeah. I think what all of this is bringing up is essentially that this is complex. It's very dependent on the local community, the country, the language, the parents that you're working with. And I think, sorry, I think Jane, you were trying to say something, but I think these are, go back to the point, I think these are essentially the things that we're going to dive into in the community of practice. So I think this is just a teaser for some of the approaches that we're going to see. So I'm going to let Jane have the last word.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I was just going to really pretty much emphasize what everyone has been saying, that it's really highly contextual. And so it depends on what kind of context we're talking about, because even those urban and rural contexts are not static as well. So, and at the moment, there's quite a lot of migration and all of these changes that are happening, which also impact how parents can actually influence their children's literacy. So it's a broad topic. We can't exhaust it today. But I also want to emphasize something that Margaret said about co-creation of resources, co-creation of solutions with the parents themselves. That's a very important strategy to actually break into the communities. Thank you.
No, thank you, Jane. And I think that's key takeaway from me is that parents as equal partners, the power really being with the parents and not all of us that are coming in to work in these communities. And I think that is really what we're going to be exploring. So as always, thank you to every one of you that has participated in the webinar. Thank you to our panel. We're going to have some of them in the community of practice as well. So that will be a way for us to engage further on this topic. And I think there's so much to learn and so much for us to do. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing from all of you. You will get follow-up from us. And if you want to engage on this topic more, please reach out to either Priyanka or myself at GSF, and we can take this forward with you. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of the day wherever you are in the world.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks,
you to the both of you
everyone.
as well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.